If you made a list of every movie that advanced the technology of its time and made progress to change how movies were made, you would have to include Jurassic Park in 1993. The 90s to early 2000s is a small window in time that's a sweet spot for seeing how the technology we use today, meaning CGI, was really progressing. It's a window where filmmakers still had to film everything practically, but if they were smart, they could add this new technology called computer graphics. And when they did, you were easily able to tell. And depending on who you ask, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. To me, this is what makes it the perfect moment in time to learn from. Today, you can't really tell when you're looking at something if it's real or CGI. Like, here's a test. Is there anything here you think is CGI? No? Well, his mouth and lips are. What about here? Just a nice cute dog, right? Well, that dog is CGI and everything you know is a lie. If you go back though, there was a time where you knew you were looking at an effects shot. And even though you knew there was trickery going on, you didn't know the exact method of how things were done unless you researched it. For Jurassic Park, there's hundreds of effects and techniques in that first movie alone that are worth talking about. And if you've seen my channel before, then you'll know that I have. I would spend time reading articles, watching videos, and analyzing scenes. Then I'd come up with a script to explain these effects in my videos, and I thought it was all good. And I was truly educating my audience on, like I've said, a historical point in film. However, it wasn't until I actually started posting these videos that my audience pointed out something very interesting. Was I misinformed? It all started with this one video that I posted, which is currently hovering around 2 million views, so thank you for that. In it, I briefly discuss how Spielberg initially hired Phil Tippett, the GOAT of Go Motion, whose work you probably know from Star Wars, to do the dinosaur effects with miniature models. The results looked like this, and Spielberg still didn't like that it didn't look 100% fully realistic. That's when Dennis Muren and ILM came up with the idea and method of making the dinosaurs with CGI. So they created this clip, and once Spielberg saw it, it was game over for Phil Tippett and his Go Motion puppets, thus essentially ending the era of Go Motion and the beginning of CGI creature work in movies. I thought it was a great video. Here, I'll show it to you now just so you can understand the context. This one clip from Jurassic Park changed filmmaking, and here's how. Before filming even started, Spielberg and his team had to figure out how they were going to create the effect of the dinosaurs. Phil Tippett was tasked to create the techniques entirely using Go Motion, which for the purpose of this video, you could think of as stop motion animation but with motion blur. It was the best and most accurate technique for doing the effect, used in other movies like Terminator. This is the test footage he created, but Spielberg still believed it didn't look 100% right. That's when Dennis Muren and ILM came to Spielberg with the idea to do a test of 100% CGI dinosaurs, first animating just the bones, but because the animation looked so good, they decided to see how it would look fully fledged out, and this was the clip. The animation looks perfect, and compared to Go Motion, it's entirely smooth. This obviously created a problem for people like Phil Tippett, as their techniques of Go Motion wouldn't be needed anymore for the movie, and he said this change was devastating. So we could look back at this moment and say, this one clip from Jurassic Park changed. I was and am still proud of that video, and it performed well. However, like I mentioned before, I was flooded with comments about how I was lying. First, I got defensive and wanted to argue with people, telling them that they're the ones that are wrong, because I got all my information from Steven Spielberg himself in the making of documentary about the production of the movie. In that video, Spielberg explains the whole thing of Phil Tippett and Dennis Muren coming up with the idea to do CGI, and it's just a great educational watch. So my thought process was, these people commenting know more than the man who made the movie? However, it wasn't their opinions. They were saying this because of this documentary released in 2022 called Jurassic Park. It tells the real story, the story that many tried to hide. So as any self-proclaimed YouTuber journalist would, I watched this hour and 20-minute documentary, and I think it's only fair that I correct myself and say this. Yes, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. So let me tell you the real story of how Jurassic Park changed filmmaking. While what I said in that video is true, the part about how Jurassic Park was really the film that started the shift to CGI characters in movies, what I said about Dennis Muren being the one who came up with the idea and created the digital test shots for the CGI dinosaurs was completely false. But to understand why Spielberg would lie and claim it was Dennis who accomplished this feat in the documentary, we need to go back a few years to 1989. for a movie called The Abyss and the days of ILM after Star Wars. You need to remember, this is what CGI looked like at the time. It looked artificial and fake, but James Cameron wanted to create CGI that was photoreal. That's when ILM hired Steve Spaz Williams, who was one of the few people in the world with fluid simulation skills and computer animation knowledge. They also hired Mark DePay, who was the first person ever at ILM to have a PhD in computer graphics. They both worked in the downstairs of ILM in what was called the Pit. It was there where they created the effect of the water tentacle for The Abyss. And let's just say that these two were a little bit of outsiders. They were some of the only people in the world with this knowledge of computer graphics in an industry still mostly stuck in their old ways. No higher-ups embraced the new computer technologies at first. Only until they started to see commercial success with it for things like Terminator 2 did they start to believe in it. The more money these movies made, the more quote-unquote experts arose that in reality had no knowledge of computer animation. There was a big political conflict between the management at ILM and the misfit artists of Spaz Williams and Mark DePay. And it's important to understand this when contextualizing Jurassic Park's effects. For example, they would throw these parties in the office called Nailed, an evening of social penetration, so you can imagine how the higher-ups felt about that. Let's just say they were doing things that most normal people would classify as having fun, but some of the higher-up management saw it as them not being professional. But they couldn't do anything about it because these two were solely responsible for Terminator 2's effects. There was one higher up who truly saw the vision of where CGI can evolve to in the future, and that was ILM legend Dennis Muren, who you could think of as one of the guys responsible for Star Wars effects. So yeah, he's a legend. But although he was smart enough to believe in CGI, he didn't actually know anything about the process of how it worked. So for something like Terminator 2, Spaz and DePay had to answer to Muren even though they knew more than him about computer graphics. Which, if you ever worked at a company before, you know that hierarchies are part of the game. Except Spaz didn't play that game. With the release of T2, it was Dennis Muren who got the real credit, labeled as the sorcerer and Spaz just as his apprentice. When again, it was really Spaz who made these effects. The credit was given to the person who didn't even understand how it was done, he said. Like for example, the water tentacle shot from The Abyss that Spaz created that we talked about earlier. Can you guess who accepted the Oscar for Best Visual Effects for the movie? Dennis. What about when T2 won the Oscar? Yep, Dennis accepted that award too. And not only that, he didn't even thank Spaz in his speech. So that brings us to Jurassic Park. And again, Dennis was chosen to lead the computer graphics team and not Spaz. Dennis actually decided there should barely be any CGI in Jurassic Park because he wanted to get his stop-motion buddy Phil Tippett involved. But Spaz disagreed. He knew the technology was ready for this movie, but Dennis denied it. Think about that. Jurassic Park would have been a stop-motion movie and would have looked entirely different now if it wasn't for this one thing that Spaz did. During his free time, he was the one who built that test clip that I spoke about earlier. He created the CGI dinosaur to show off to the producers, and it was all part of his plan. Unprompted, when he heard that the producers were coming into the offices, he purposely had this test clip playing on a monitor in the open. And of course, once they saw it, everything changed. Now, ILM was tasked with doing fully 3D dinosaur scenes, so Spaz created this clip of the T-Rex fully built. However, he wasn't allowed to come with Dennis to show it to Spielberg. Once again, Dennis was the frontman for the computer graphics team, while Spaz was just labeled as an animator. So that's why when talking about it, Spielberg gives credit to Dennis, because that's all he knew. He was worried about making his own movie, not about any of the politics going on at ILM. And of course, as you know, Jurassic Park not only popularized CGI, but it also showed it can be monetarily successful. As for Spaz's story, it's not as positive. Because again, when Jurassic Park won the Oscar, it was Dennis Muren and Phil Tippett who received the award. And Spaz just couldn't handle this, and unfortunately, it was his downfall, as he basically committed career suicide, going on a press tour talking about how he was the one responsible for the effects and not Dennis Muren. But I personally don't want to focus on that to end this video. Instead, I think it's better to look at how Spaz's work truly impacted the industry, because this was the beginning of studios forcing computer effects into movies. It was also the start of the trend of recreating 2D movies in 3D. something that's still going on today. However you want to frame it, positive or negative, you can't deny that Spaz's work changed how movies were made. Without him, who knows if Jurassic Park would have ever done fully CGI dinosaurs with Dennis leading the team. Who knows how long it would have taken for Spielberg and ILM to have another project that pushed the envelope. It's just a shame that most people, myself included, never heard Spaz's story and how someone else took credit for his work. But now you know the truth. The truth about how Jurassic Park changed filmmaking. Thank you for watching.